Thank you, and good morning. I work, as Sandro said, in Cisco. I'm the global head of data analytics. I've been in the company for about 20 years. I used to have hair when I joined. And I had 4 jobs, basically. I started in the 90s with e-commerce. Then I moved into sustainability 15 years ago. 10 years ago, I co-founded our Smart Cities program. And today, I'm basically trying to understand what happens with data analytics and so on. So I'll be trying for the next 20 minutes to bring together my 4 passions and to see what comes out of that. So as part of my job, I travel the world, work with NGOs, governments, private sector customers, startups, citizen groups. And it's very clear that today we are, from a technology perspective, on what I call the 4th phase of the internet. I joined Cisco again in the mid-90s, when the internet was really about connectivity. I remember having to explain to my father what the internet was, and my definition to him in 1994 was, internet is this technology which is going to cannibalize the fax, right? So we basically send messages to each other, and that's what it was. Then towards the end of the 90s, the internet became a commerce phenomenon. E-commerce was the big word. Companies started to think about how do we make money with this new technology, how do we rethink about processes, how do we go to market, how do we transform our supply chain, and that was the second phase. Then in 2000, the bubble bursted, and then a much more sustainable growth was born with that issue. We started to move into the social part of the internet, where through social media, people started to come together and started to rethink about the way we will communicate with each other, come together as communities, and the likes of that. And today, we are in a new phase. We are in a phase in which not only our computers and telephones are becoming connected, but a phase in which all the elements of our built environment around us basically get connected to the network. Bricks of walls, vehicles, wearable things. So this connectivity basically generates a number of opportunities. We are today having, and this is the year, in which more devices are connected than people on the Earth. The other data point is that we are only able to connect today 0.5% of what actually and technically can be connected. So there's a whole way ahead of objects, of things, of processes becoming connected. They change basically not only businesses, but also change the way people work with each other, but also change processes. Think about the medical advances that we have by basically using connectivity and be able to understand by phone, looking at ourselves, the heartbeat that we have by basically having a camera in our phone looking into the glimpse of our skin, and therefore basically using this as a completely new device. Other important information here is you think about the latest A380 Airbus. The jet engine, in 30 minutes, produces more data than what the humans have done in their whole history until 2001. So we produce enormous amount of data, and we basically are connecting everything. Second data point is that we tend to save 96% of the data that we produce, but we're only able to use 4%. This whole phenomenon has many names. Technology firms, research firms, analysts like Gartner call it the digital disruptor, the third platform, the network forces. The big name that you probably have heard today or in the last few months is the Internet of Things. We tend to call this at Cisco the Internet of Everything, because it's not only about connecting objects, it is about generating data and information for these objects becoming connected. It's about, therefore, redefining processes, being able to provide information to the right user at the right time. But it's also, and much more importantly, the possibility to redefine the relationship between people and the environment in which they live. And that's why we're basically taking this holistic view of what the internet allows us to do today. Clive Hamby, which is a known marketeer for those who come from the UK, created this sentence saying data is the new oil. Data is a new sense of wealth for all of us that comes with the risks, but also comes with the opportunities. The main issue in data is basically the capability to make sense out of it and create value out of it. So last year, my group ran a piece of research with about 1,200 companies, small, large, and government, try to understand what are the major challenges that you face in this whole new world. right? Connecting things is becoming quite simple. Technologies are there, processes are starting to basically allow that and so on. So if you think about a city like Barcelona, there's much more connectivity, much more broadband, but also much a connected object that we used to have, for example, 5 years ago. People are starting to get familiar with technology, so they're starting to use applications and services more than what we think sometimes. Processes are becoming redefined, they're changing. The major issue basically is about data. It's about making sense and, again, extracting value out of this because of three fundamental issues that we face today in the big data world. By opening up all our infrastructures, our sensors, our data centers, and so on, we usually come into three issues. We call the issues of the 3V. We produce an enormous amount of data. Volumes are very large. And what we do today is we copy data from when they are produced into big data centers, sometimes into the cloud, as we say, in other parts of the world, which is quite expensive to copy and to transfer. And the second issue is when you copy and paste this data, this information becomes obsolete by definition because you store it somewhere else. The second issue is variety. 20 years ago when I joined Cisco, most of the information that we produced digitally was done by people with Y codes into large IBM centers that were inputting data into those large computers. And then companies like SAP, like Oracle, created these huge ERP databases for enterprises. Again, a centralized way of producing data and of consuming it. And if you think about the four phases of the internet, they brought us into a completely different world, in which data are not only consumed and produced centrally, but data also produced and consumed locally. Tweets, Facebook information, pictures. We've seen some example this morning. Data coming out of sensors that measure temperature. Right? So all this data now is distributed, and therefore the languages, the protocols of this data are very different. It is very difficult to compare and to contrast and combine data in an Excel spreadsheet with a tweet, right? But we need to be able to do that. And the third issue that we face is the issue of velocity. We want to use information in real time or near real time. We are gone from the world of using technology and information to do statistics of what happened in the past, but we do it today. If you think about a city of Barcelona, like any other major city government will run what we call an origin-destination analysis on where people go to and from every day into a city, and they will do this analysis every 5 years. They will spend quite a few millions of euros to do this analysis. It will take them 2 years to collect the data. And when they get the insight that when people go to and from, the information is already obsolete. Today, literally, we do this with MIT, you can look anonymously at the movement of SIM cards around Barcelona, and you can in real time understand when people go to and from, and therefore you can reconfigure your entire transport network to basically measure information. So it's real time. So answering to those three challenges is the issue because of large volumes of data, different languages that they have, and the need to basically have a very quick insight to what you want to be changing into your city, for example. And therefore, we need to rethink from an industry perspective in IT about the way we manage those data. We need to move away from the model that you have today, which is, again, centralized industrial-grade command and control data management, into a much more democratically distributed way of managing information. And to do that, we need to think about what happens today in all those sensors, be telephones, be computers, be physical sensors into our environment, I'll say, digital sensors, which are basically changing in three ways. Sensors and collectors of data are becoming, first of all, much more context-aware. Your telephone allows the telecom companies that basically distribute to know where you are, but you also have in your phone an accelerometer, right, that basically knows where you are. A sensor into the city and environmental sensors know the position through GPS. So context-aware. The sensor also knows what the temperature is, what the moisture of the air. Second is that sensor is becoming much more energy efficient. In Nice, in France, with some partners, we're now deploying parking sensors in the curb of the streets, where the battery lasts 20 years. So you don't have to connect everything with electricity, but you basically can solar enable and basically make those devices much more energy intensive and efficient. And the last piece of the sensors revolution is the sensors are basically developing some computing capacity. There is some memory in the sensor, which means the sensor can take some calculations. This basically is allowing us to rethink the whole way managing data is run and to distribute the whole architecture. And therefore, to make sure, and we do this in Barcelona in the 22 Arroba district, the traffic light is able to understand how many cars are passing by, what the temperature is, if there is a storm coming, and basically switches it on or off, red or green, using that local information. So we're somehow distributing the whole intelligence, democratizing the decisions, and making sure that we don't have this centralized model anymore, but it's basically all distributed. So this is a huge and massive change, and it's the only way in which we can start scaling the data management around this huge thing called the internet, and tackling the issue that we spoke about before, volume, velocity, and variety. The network, therefore, this big companion of billions of devices, is becoming the database. It's becoming the intelligent element that we can use to better manage our cities, to better manage enterprises, to rethink about relationship with our citizens and customers, but also to have basically come together in a completely different view. This type of transformation in the sustainability and city space, this is what I've been asking to talk about, has already begun. If you take transportation as a subset of our cities, we've gone through a process for which we are trying to add some software to some vehicles, make smarter dashboards, into external factors disrupting the entire market. Google today, as you probably have read, is experimenting about a self-driving car. So an analytics company built on an algorithm is basically redefine the way transportation works, and people drive or don't drive. While governments around the world have been thinking about self-organizing transport system for the last 25 years, I've been in endless conferences about this, a startup in Silicon Valley, in San Francisco, Uber, comes up with an application with a data management system and revolutionizes the entire industry, based, by the way, on the concept of a social network. In France, Robin Chase, which is the founder of Zipcar, creates a huge movement called bus car, based on excess capacity. People use their car for like an hour to 2 a day in Paris. And now they can basically share the car from a community perspective with other citizens on a very basic principle called trust. So I give you my car, I lend you my car, I know on the social network who you are and how friendly you are with the cars that you basically share with somebody else, and I'll basically trust you. And this is becoming huge. And last one, which is quite interesting for me, a Silicon Valley startup called Tesla creates a high-potential battery, puts some software around it, designs a car, and revolutionizes industry by becoming a new icon. So there's lots of change on a technology data analytics basis, just to take this. If you look into energy, if you look into building management and so on, we could be talking for hours about those type of transitions. But basically, change is happening in front of us. And the question often is, what is the answer by city governments? How do I make my cities smart? Cisco has been working with the city of Barcelona for about 10 years now in the journey towards smart city. The first thing that we did is this area called 22 Arroba, which I will invite you to go and visit if you're staying here for a few more days. We started to think about what happens when we collect and connect devices and data from all the different systems, the lighting, the transportation, this water system. And we start basically technology-enable those single infrastructures. Then the second piece that we did was to say, what if we create a common platform which we're going to use to manage in an integrated way light, water, transportation, waste management, and all the other utilities. From an economic perspective, it does not make sense to create a network for each of your elements of the urban infrastructure. But when you create one broadband network, you connect all the objects there, the economics start basically to resonate much better. And today, for example, we're starting to look into how by internet enabling your public lighting, you start switching on a lamppost only when people come by because you have a sensor which is connected. And you start using that asset only for 3, 4 hours a day instead of 8. And the question is, what do you do on the remaining 22 hours when you have this object which is now connected? You amortize it, but you don't use it. So we started to bring new services on top of the infrastructure. We use the connectivity to connect to parking sensors to be able to collect parking fees when somebody parks there. So we use the money to basically finance the Latin infrastructure. We also connect environmental sensors, which is usually for the government a very big loss of money because you don't get any revenue back. But now you linked it into the system. And we do the same for the garbage removal sensors. In Nice, for example, the city government came to us and said, we see the issue of garbage removal not only in understanding when the bins are full with the sensor and we send out the truck, but we also want to be able to sense smell. In the touristic areas close to the beach, you want to be able to see when the garbage is piling up and what type of smell is there so we can send the truck and basically create a much more pleasant environment. So you have these type of things coming together. But probably the biggest innovation that we see happening, at least I see around the world, is to switch from the concept of smart city being a concept based on objects and infrastructure into a concept based on developing a new relationship with the citizens and helping them become more smart. So in Barcelona, as well as in many other cities around the world, governments are starting to engage with NGOs, with businesses, and especially with citizens on a completely different conversation. In Chongqing, China, citizens are using the internet in a city, in a country which is not known for being extremely open there, to do collaboratory planning and collaboratory budgeting. In Amsterdam, the cities basically open up all their data, open data infrastructure, into what we call hackathon, which are basically development competition where people basically come together and develop application and software to drive value. The city of Boston 8 years ago moved from awarding a $1 million contract for a transportation application to a large corporation into running an hackathon and having basically a local startup develop their application with much better functionality for 1/10 of the price that the original company was charging them for. So there's the whole idea of open innovation, crowdsourcing, and community engagement into the design of the new city. And this is creating, as we see, new jobs. It's creating new energy into the local communities that start thinking about the technology, but also the management of the technology, the installation of the broadband network into communities, which becomes a new job in places like the Netherlands. All this is allowing us to redefine the concept of urbanism. The term, by the way, urbanismo, was coined 150 years ago in this city by an architect called Ildefonso Cerdà. So Barcelona was at the forefront of designing cities and urbanism, and today they're doing this again. We can literally rethink about where people live, work, play, and learn, and design cities in a completely different way because it is possible for us to bring information to the citizen as opposite, for example, to have the citizen drive every day to work to access the information. With the distributed information model, we can basically redesign everything about cities. Vancouver, to me, for those who have been there, is a classic example of rethinking urban design and somehow, in many ways, abolishing zoning. This is where retail is, this is where offices is, and this is where residential is. This concept is basically burned away because we can use the infrastructure and the internet in a completely different way. And we have to start thinking not only how do we design utilities, water, light, gas, but also how do we design broadband network into our cities, which many call basically the fourth critical utility. So urban design changes in front of us and allow us to rethink about new opportunities. All the way, and that's the biggest challenge that I think we face today in the smart cities and sustainability space, into scaling those type of innovations. I was at the European Commission 2 weeks ago, and I was making the point that Europe has become the land of pilots. We have thousands of pilots around smart cities and technology and sustainability. And I've questioned quite a few people 10 days ago, have anybody seen in Europe or in the rest of the world a smart city pilot moving to a full rollout? And the room was silent for about 2 minutes. So the issue today is that we produce lots of technology, But we don't have yet figured out the relationship between enterprises, the public sector, and NGOs in scaling these technologies into the market. So together with the French government, a couple of months ago, we decided to sign an MOU, an on-joint program, called the Digital Nation, to think through how can we codify best and bad practices in the smart city space and roll them out across the country. Of course, we roll out the best practices. How can we start bringing investment from a Cisco perspective into France to scale up the enormous amount of startups who are thinking about application and services but are not able to move from 5 people into 50 people? So bringing in venture capital, but also rethinking about the economic models for which technology companies go to market and scale up those type of things. We also committed to train 22,000 new students across the country on what we call the Internet of Everything. We have a large program called Networking Academy, for which we basically train about 6 million students a year around the world on this technology, with the objective of basically driving forward GDP and creating new jobs. Now, if you think about the journey that I spoke about at the beginning of this conversation, and when you observe the best practices, I always come across 4 major areas around the world, which are quite interesting. First of all, those projects and programs work because there is leadership, both from the top, at the political level, but also at the bottom, from a civil society, from a community level. And I will argue this room has enough leadership to drive transformation from pilots into rollouts. The second factor is governance. Figuring out how public-private partnership work, adding, of course, the NGOs as the enablers of all this, and especially engaging citizens in the design of the whole program, seems to work quite well. The third element is competencies. And there's a whole new discussion about skill shortage around the world, about people who work in the intersection between design and branding, math and data science, and all the other technical issues like economics, like environmentalism, and so on. Looking at those intersections is a very interesting thing to do, and the governments are basically developing whole new training courses and knowledge creation programs to basically look at that. And the last one is technology. An organization who worked very well are the ones that basically distributed the technology architecture, democratized the access to information and to the network, and basically drive massive change across the world. Thank you.